Welcome to Steward Leaders, a podcast for leaders who understand that our leadership is not about us. I'm Eric Alexander. In these conversations, we explore what it means to lead as stewards, living our leadership for something bigger than ourselves. Listeners, thanks for joining us today, and hello to you too, Bill Chittenden. Thanks so much for taking time for a Steward Leaders conversation.
Well, thank you for having me, Eric. I'm looking forward to visiting with you.
Great. Listeners, you're going to enjoy getting to know Bill. I certainly have, and he's got lots of interesting perspectives and aspects of his life, and I'll tell you in a little bit how we've intersected, but first I'll direct you to the show notes, the episode notes, if you want to see his full bio. It's impressive. He's actually Dr. William Chittenden, Ph.D. from Texas Tech in finance, if I remember correctly, right?
That is it. Guns up.
So there you go. Presently, he's the president and CEO of the Southwestern Graduate School of Banking at SMU, and that's where we've intersected. I've had the opportunity, grateful you had me last year to come be part of the faculty. Look forward to that again this June. And so we've intersected there, but I also run into Bill pretty much wherever Texas bankers gather. And that's been all over the state in various settings.
I try to keep the visibility up for SWGSB, as we refer to the Southwestern Graduate School of Banking for those that aren't familiar. But yeah, try to be active with both the Texas Bankers Association, TBA, IBAT, the Independent Bankers Association of Texas, and then when I have the opportunity to speak to some of the regional groups of bankers across the state.
And he's regularly giving economic updates all around. And so I see him, if you follow him on LinkedIn, you will see him popping up all over the place. He's an educator, he's a leader, he's a gracious, smart man. Really glad you're here today.
Thank you very much.
Now, Bill, one thing I didn't know until I read the bio, and I didn't tell you we were going to talk about this, but you're a co-author of a book, The Art of Transforming Data,
Yes.
subtitle, A Banker's Guide to Dashboards and Scorecards. Talk about that a little bit.
So this was a project that I worked on with Dr. Ed Siegfried, who's a longtime friend. He's the chief economist here at SWGSB, and then a professor emeritus from Lafayette College in Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And for those that have been to any of our assemblies for bank directors, one of the big draws each time is Dr. Ed giving his view on the economy and where things are headed. And then with Jamie Sumner, whose firm produces reports for community banks in terms of, how are they doing relative to, their peers. It's a lot more in-depth and informative than just a typical UBPR. And so the three of us together thought, this is an area that bankers need to understand and know about, because you can be drowning in data.
Right.
But if, 10 of those data points are the most important ones, then let's create a dashboard that highlights those 10. And then in terms of the scorecards is, you're going to get what you measure. So what outcomes do you want? And let's keep track of how those metrics are doing. And so the idea was to put this relatively short book together. It's an easy read. You can take care of it on a plane ride. And for us, it's nice because we're able to give it out to attendees at our various functions. And it's not something that we've got on Amazon. It's something that we reserve for our attendees at our various events.
Okay, very good. Well, I definitely see the value in that, being a finance person, understanding the value of data and how we translate that into information and insights. What do we do about it?
Exactly.
Very good. Well, talk a little bit about SWGSB as well. So Southwestern Graduate School of Banking. Let me just say this. When I was at Happy State Bank, we regularly were sending folks there to SWGSB as part of their development and training, along with a couple other banking schools around. But talk a little bit about the mission of that, because that will lead into the main topics I want to address today.
Sure. So when we talk about SWGSB, there's really two things that you can think about. One is our marquee program, which is a 3-year program where community bankers are on campus here at SMU for 2 weeks for 3 years. We keep them busy. Year one, they're learning the fundamentals of banking, blocking and tackling. Year two, they start getting exposed a little bit more to some of the managerial concepts. And then year three, there's a big focus on leadership. One of the things that we have that's extremely unique at SWGSB, none of the other graduate schools of banking have, is each year we have a living case where a bank has agreed to pull back the curtain and let the 300 bankers look at their bank. In essence, what the bank gets out of it is they end up with 15 teams of consultants that are going to make recommendations after they've visited with management a little bit and say, here are some things that we think that you've got a great bank, but here's what you could do maybe to make it a little bit better. And in fact, it wasn't that long ago that Happy State Bank was the living case study bank. And Pat Hickman came down and was extremely gracious with his time and visited with the students. And for the students, it's great because over 3 years, they get to see three very different banks. So last year, for example, we had Prime Bank, $300-400 million bank out of the Austin area, Dripping Springs, Crossway Springs, down in there. Prior to that, we had B1 Bank, so relatively large Louisiana bank. Not too long ago, we had First Financial out of Abilene, again, a pretty large bank. So they get to see very different banks from different parts of the state or different parts of the region. And they can get some ideas on, these are some pretty well-run banks, and hopefully we can take some of those ideas back to our bank. For the case study bank, their benefit is every year we've heard from management, either one of two things or both, is one, the students brought us a nugget that we hadn't thought of before. And so that made it worth our time right there. Or two, they already confirmed something that we didn't publicly disclose. We've already been thinking about it, and now we've got these external folks that have looked at it and came up with that same recommendation. So we feel even more confident in what we're going to be doing going forward. And so we've got over 12,000 alumni from SWGSB, and so that's a big part of it is the network. And each class that goes through, they really bond, and particularly now with technology, GroupMe and those types of things, they really do stay together and communicate with each other on a regular basis. And then bigger, we have other programming, although that's our marquee program. We educate all kinds of community bankers and community bank directors. So we have our commercial lending school, which is actually coming up next month, where for those that are early in their credit career, we've got 2 levels. And so for those that are very early, they start with level 1. It's a week here at SMU. And then we have level 2 for those that are more experienced or that have already gone through level 1. We do that in conjunction with the Texas Bankers Association. Later on in the year, we'll be hosting the Bank Operations Institute, where we work with IBAT, Independent Bankers Association of Texas, on that for folks on the operations side. So again, a week here on campus, and that's a 2-year program for 1 week each. And then for the bank directors, we have our assemblies for bank directors, where we've got current topics on what they need to know about. We just got back. I know it's a tough place, but we got back from Oahu at the end of January. And then the first week of September, we will be in Beaver Creek, Colorado. We usually have pretty good keynote speakers. We've had, I guess a year ago, we had Lori Logan, president of the Dallas Fed, spoke for us in Palm Springs. In Oahu, Vice Chair Supervision Mickey Bowman was our keynote speaker. We're looking at still locking in our keynote for Beaver Creek, but we're sure it's going to be on that caliber.
That's good.
And so these generally, they start on Thursday evening with a reception, and then we go all day Friday, about half a day on Saturday, a little bit on Sunday morning. So folks are getting a lot of good education for experienced bankers, and particularly for bankers directors that are new to banking. They might be great at whatever business they're in, but banking is so different. Even if they just look at the balance sheet, they're trying to figure out how come all the loans are on the asset side and on mine it's over on the liability side.
Right.
And so get them up to speed on what you need to understand about banking to be an effective community bank director. And for those that want to get certified, we have our National Certified Community Bank Directors program. Again, we've got 2 levels, 2.5 days each year in November for bankers to come to campus and get the fundamentals of what it takes to be an effective bank director. And so all of that is, the programming that we do for uh, bankers across the state and across the country.
Well, I'm a fan. I'm a fan of SWGSB. I'm a fan of the concept, the graduate schools of banking. When I came into banking about, oh, I don't know, what's it been, 13 years ago, it was a new world for me. And so I'd been in a little bit, and Pat, you mentioned Pat earlier, the CEO said, Eric, I'd like to send you to a school. It was a different school, but I'd never encountered this idea of a graduate school. And it's for our listeners, it's not like a master's degree. It's graduate level instruction, graduate level content. It's not a degree program, but there is enough complexity in this world, financial institutions, that it's super valuable to have these things where people are already into their career. These are generally not students right out of their undergraduate. They're generally, what, 7, 10 years into their career for you?
Exactly. Our typical profile would be those with 7 to 10 years of banking experience, and then they've been identified as the future leaders of their bank, and that's why the bank is investing the time and the money and energy to send them to this program. To me, the proof is in the pudding in terms of us educating the future leaders in Texas banking. If you look at the Texas Bankers Association, the previous chair, Jan Mills, and the current chair, Ron Butler, both SWGSB grads. If you look at IBAT and look at their previous chair, Tracy Harris, you look at the current chair, Greg Wilson, you look at the incoming chair, Gabe Guerrera, all SWGSB grads. And so our graduates literally are the leaders in Texas banking.
Fingerprints all over the Texas
Yes.
banking leadership, absolutely. And so I've worked with and actively involved with 5 different banking schools. Surely a fan of yours, and also the whole idea of to take this broad a little more broadly and get outside of even just banking. The idea of us as leaders continuing whatever tools are available to us to be growing in our leadership, learning more about our industries, learning more about our companies, learning more about leadership. So absolutely a fan for what you're doing, Bill.
Well, and I agree with that 100%. I mean, I spend a great deal of my time simply reading. And I'll admit, I don't get to read for enjoyment very much anymore, although I do enjoy what I read,
Right.
but trying to keep up with what's going on in the industry.
There's plenty.
It's a fast-changing industry, and so you've got to stay on top of things. And, I've with my background, hopefully it would be obvious, but obviously a very strong proponent of lifelong learning. And this is, SWGSB is just one part of that.
There you go. So that leads right into one of the topics that I want to talk about. So the show is Steward Leaders. It's not about us, talking about stewardship. Think out loud with me about stewardship and the challenges that are facing bank leaders. The SWGSB program and all its various aspects is designed to help leaders, board, 10 years in, whatever, help them grow in their leadership. How does stewardship play into that? Of course, for our listeners, they're not all going to be bankers. Principles here will be broadly applicable, but as you think about the challenges bank leaders face, how does stewardship play in?
Well, I think if you look at a common profile of a community bank, it's often a family-run bank, may have been run for multiple generations. And I think there it's a little bit easier to see that as the leader of the bank today, you are the steward of it. You are taking care of it so that it can be passed down to the next generation. And you see that with small businesses across the country, where you have the founders, or perhaps it's the second generation. And unfortunately, sometimes when you get to the third or fourth generation, they're just not interested in the family business. And you have a lot of that with community banks, just like with any other small business. So then you've got to invest in the folks that are going to be continuing on. Right. And so if you want to be that steward, if you want to protect that bank and prepare that bank for the future, part of that is who are those future leaders going to be? And unfortunately, I think succession planning, and that's really what this is part of, is a difficult conversation for folks to have, for boards to have, for management to have, because part of that is having to acknowledge, I can't do this forever.
Right.
and somebody else is going to come in after me and take care of it. And unfortunately, for some of us, our personalities are such that it's hard for us to let go. But we have to understand that you have to have that succession plan. You've got to have something identified or someone identified as who's going to come up the pipeline. I've heard way too many stories of community banks where the current level of the C-suite has all come in at the same time, and they're basically all going to retire within a few years of each other. And then you say, okay, you're making these very long-term plans. You're only going to be here for a short period of time. By your own admission, you want to retire shortly. Who do you have in the pipeline that's going to be able to continue that plan? And go, well, we haven't identified those folks yet. Well, how can you be talking about retiring if you haven't identified who's going to be taking over as the steward? Because that's what really you're trying to identify are those future stewards of the bank to be able to carry it forward.
And so that process of thinking through and planning ahead and executing the succession is a stewardship action
Oh, absolutely.
informed by a stewardship mindset.
Yes.
And it's the on-ramp into those roles is not short, ideally. And it really helps. You talked about this. Let's be training up those leaders who can fill that seat at some point. It's planting those seeds that it could be years and years before those seeds bear fruit. But if you wait till too late, you're going to feel the pinch for sure.
And part of it just comes with time and experience and that knowledge transfer from, the C-suite now to that future C-suite.
That's right.
And it's not something that you can sit down and just, well, let me type out everything you're going to need to know. Well, no, that's not going to be very practical.
Right.
And even if you did, how long is that going to be? And so a lot of folks, it's just, let me look over your shoulder. Let me see
Right.
how you're doing it right now. That institutional knowledge that you've got, slowly start transferring it over. Unfortunately, again, as you said, it's applicable to small businesses across the country, but particularly in community banks, if you've got a founder that unfortunately all of a sudden has a health issue, some other issue where they're unable to continue to run the bank, it's if they don't have a plan, then it becomes potentially an M&A target, and maybe that wasn't the hope. That's not what we had built this up for, to hand down to the next generation just for some large conglomerate to swallow them up, because nobody was there to steer the ship.
Right. And who knows what it'll look like on the other side of that.
Exactly.
So you're raising an interesting aspect here. I want to think some about the board. Y'all are very intentional with your training opportunities for boards. But when I think about stewardship as it relates to a board, their leadership looks different. And part of what looks different from my perspective is that they are governing as a group, which also means by design, the group itself has a long life, even if the individual members don't, which makes sense to me when they are the stewards of the governance, the oversight, the value, the values, the mission, the kinds of things that have a long, long horizon. Talk some about directors specifically.
Well, I'll address it and say it from the perspective of looking at outside directors, because you have the inside directors,
Yes.
which are generally,
Wearing
management
both
of the bank.
hats.
And so they already know the inside of banking. They're going to be involved in the day-to-day. They're going to be involved in all the tactical stuff that needs to be done. I think sometimes for the outside directors, the challenge is understanding that their role is not in the day-to-day activities of the bank. Theirs is to help set the strategic vision for the bank.
Right.
If need be, to help formulate what the culture is going to be. What kind of bank do we really want to have, and do we have the right resources in place, the right people in place to accomplish that?
Including that succession on down the way.
Exactly. And then it's management's job to implement that. And the board should be holding management accountable. If they've set goals on, for example, we need to have, X number of people identified as potential future leaders of this institution, and the next meeting comes around and, well, we didn't really get around to that. That's a potential sign of a problem.
Mhm. And that holding accountable is an appropriate role for the board. That's what they've got to
Oh,
do to be effective.
well, they do, and particularly with, again, since we're talking about succession planning, that's something that the regulators are going to be looking at.
That's right.
They want to make sure that there is some type of succession plan. The directors are fiduciaries of the bank, and the regulators are going to be, they don't send the message to the management, they send it to the board, and they say, okay, board members, how come you haven't done this as we have instructed you to do? And if one of them is succession planning or whatever else it might be,
Right.
the board's ultimately responsible for making sure that those issues are addressed, even though they're the ones that aren't going to actually be implementing it. They've got to make sure that the folks that are supposed to be doing it are doing it.
Right. And it's always helpful, particularly when the regulatory expectations are clear and common sense, like you need to have a strategic plan, you've got to have data, you've got to have business continuity, you need to be working on succession. It's always better if management and the board are already ahead of that. The
Yes,
regulators are looking at it, not saying, where is it?
exactly. And back to the idea of, dashboards and scorecards for boards, what you don't want is to be on a bank board and it's the night before the board meeting and you get a 300-page packet because there's no way you're going to be able to go through that. And if you are going to get that size packet, then it's nice for each of those areas. Maybe it's on asset liability management, maybe it's on, where our interest rate risk is right now. But you've got a small short summary of here's where the bank is right now. This is what it means for us. And for directors, they don't have to be experts in all of these areas, but they should understand the fundamentals. Um, you know, if interest rates go up, we know bond prices are going to go down. That's one of those fundamental things. So and we know the opposite. If rates are going to fall, then those bond prices will go up. If we're at least vaguely aware of the direction of interest rates. Now, today that might be a little bit in question, but when we've got definite trends, you should be able to see
Right.
or infer what's happening and at least be able to ask the right questions. And I think that's really incumbent on the board is if you don't understand something, ask the question. Because if you're quiet because, well, I don't want to look silly because I should already know this answer. I guarantee you there's other members on the board that have that
Right.
same exact question. And so have management explain it to you. And you don't have to say explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old, but I do think explain it to me like I'm a 15-year-old because I don't need to be an expert, but I need to understand the basics of what's happening here.
Or explain it to me like I'm a college junior who's taking finance right now, where
Yeah,
I'm
exactly. Whatever your
reasonably
background is.
knowledgeable. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting you bring that up. Just last week, I was meeting with the board and we spent some time talking about good oversight, good governance. And one of my key suggestions to them there was that very thing, ask questions. Now, be careful, be thoughtful about what kinds of
Yeah.
questions. You don't want to go down bunny trails or try to solve operational problems that they can take care of and it's not really your role, but context, clarification, explain those acronyms to me. What are the consequences of this or that? And in the banking world, I think it's always helpful to say, how does this fit into the CAMEL's way of looking at the bank? Capital, asset quality, management, earnings, liquidity, sensitivity. What are the effects there? And so I came up in my head with a list of C's that helped me just kind of prompt these kinds of questions can always be helpful. And it's actually, frankly, part of helping hold management accountable, a reasonable expectation that they'll know the answers to those, or say, I don't know, but I'll get you an answer. It's going to be in your email tomorrow.
And that's the important part there is that follow-up that they don't know the answer, that they do find it and follow up and actually provide it to you. Yes.
So I'd like to look at another aspect of stewardship that I think is really present for all businesses, small and medium sized, large businesses too, but is more pronounced for financial institutions like community banks, which is stewardship and the effects of what's going on in the bank on the customers and the communities.
Well, you bring up an important point is that it's not just the management or the board or the owners of the bank that are the only stakeholders in the bank. And for stewardship, it's maintaining that. Again, I'm not the owner of SWGSB. I am a steward of it during the time that I'm leading it and getting it into a position that whenever that time comes, that future leader has a good base that they can continue to grow. And so it's the same thing for community banks, is you are currently that steward, but it's important to understand, just as I can't ignore the needs of students, and if there's a changing curriculum, then our curriculum needs to keep up with that. It's the same thing with a community bank, in that I've got depositors that are dependent on my stewardship, that this is a solid bank and their deposits are safe, regardless of deposit insurance, that they'll get their money back. The same thing is true for the borrowers, is that I've got a partner in this community bank. They're going to help me grow my business, which then is going to be good for the community because that's going to allow additional jobs, et cetera. And we've got to make sure that the bank is in good condition, and we've done that stewardship so that we can make those loans to those customers. And then just in general to the community, think of how many Little League or basketball leagues have been sponsored, and you see the bank's name on the backs of those T-shirts or on the back of those jerseys.
On the score side. Yeah.
Exactly. If you think of what are the absolute minimum needs to have a successful, vibrant community, a bank is at the center of that. And we're so fortunate in Texas in that community banks are in nearly all of our 254 counties. I believe that there's only 4 counties out of the 254 in Texas that are not serviced by a community bank. And of course, on some of those, they're very, very rural banks. Yes.
With a brick and mortar branch in the community, right?
Yes.
And probably some of those would be maybe Texas Panhandle and West. I'm looking at my map of Texas up here, and West Texas counties, where some of them are maybe 2,000 population total.
Yes, exactly. And so, they may have to go to that next county over to go to the physical bank.
Right. And then in between, then you're doing the internet banking and the mobile banking on your phone.
Exactly. But the idea is that we've got to service those customers. We've got to be able to help them. And without community banks, there's, I believe it's a ballpark 100 counties in Texas that are exclusively served by community banks. Mm-hmm. And so, you look at all those rural counties in Texas and across the country in other states, the big banks aren't banging down the doors to open up branches in those rural counties.
Right.
It's those, and even if they were, you wouldn't want to bank with them because it's all transactional. Right. And part of stewardship is relationship building. That's that idea of taking care of it long term. Mm-hmm. And part of that taking care of it long term is establishing long-term relationships. Mm-hmm. And that's that important part for a community bank, where they've been with that customer literally since they were, a little kid. How many of them that are, say, my age now, can remember going to the bank with their passbook, their actual physical passbook back in the day. Mm-hmm. And they've been that loyal to the bank, and it's been a good, beneficial relationship both ways. Mm-hmm. And it's true with any kind of relationship. Both sides have to benefit. If only one side in a relationship constantly benefits, it's going to fizzle. But for community banks to be successful, they've got to have both sides of that relationship working. And if you're keeping your depositors happy, you're keeping your borrowers happy, well, then you've done a pretty good job in terms of that stewardship, I think.
Right. That's good. I want to come back to the depositors just a little bit. As I think about small businesses in general, we're always stewards of our impact on our constituencies. You brought up depositors, and one thing that's different here for a bank is literally it's not my money.
Right.
When I renewed a CD just last week, rolled a small amount over here to local bank, and they're holding it. It sits on their balance sheet, but my wife and I own the funds. It is our money. They are literally taking care of something that doesn't belong to them. That whole right-hand side of the balance sheet is that way. The deposits, the shareholder investments, it's all about funds that others have entrusted to the bank. And so that standard of care is really high.
Well, and I think that is, to me, the definition of stewardship is you're managing all of that for someone else for the long term.
Hmm. So you talked some about the smaller banks and the smaller communities. So we'll wind down here in a minute, but community banking in these small communities really makes a difference in those small communities. What are some of the challenges that some of these counties with 20,000 and towns with 2,500, what are some of the challenges that banks based in those areas are facing?
I think it's a couple. If we look at kind of both sides there in terms of your borrowers, if you're in a small rural area, unfortunately, a lot of times the local economy is not very diversified.
Hmm.
And so if everyone works for the same big factory,
Right.
or if it's all or the vast majority is agriculture,
Or
as we know
oil and
with
gas,
agriculture,
or
it could, yeah, I mean, it goes, boom and bust.
right.
And so if you don't have that diversification, that can be troubling. It can be difficult sometimes to get through those bad times. I think one of the great things about community bankers, though, is they've been through these cycles. I mean, how many banks in Texas do we have? They're over 100 years old.
Hmm.
They've seen the cycles, and
Right.
they again, they're those long-term stewards. They understand that we know the good times aren't going to last, so we better, pad our capital right now to be prepared for the
Mm.
bad times.
Hmm.
Um, so you look at it from the similar type thing in terms of their employees is, you've got a
Mm.
lot of these banks where that's where you want to go work. Now, the
Right.
challenge, though, I think when you have uh, some of the smaller communities is getting young folks that want to
Right.
stay there.
Yes.
And, or do they want to move out of the county? They want to go to the quote unquote, the big city and, make their mark there. And so I think keeping folks in those rural communities can be the challenge for the community banks finding, good quality employees that want to be there.
Right. And it go to the big city is relative.
Yes.
People in Amarillo going to the big city means Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio. People around the Texas Panhandle go to the big city and come to Amarillo.
I was gonna say, yeah, if you're in Plainview, going to Lubbock or Amarillo is going to be the big city.
That's right. Well, Bill, I want us to start to head towards a landing. Any other thoughts you want to share?
Um, One thing we didn't talk directly about, but I think it's important in terms of leadership is, and I think it's perfectly compatible with steward leadership is servant leadership.
Mm. Hmm.
And just understanding that uh, no job is too small to do.
Mm.
And if I visited with a, bank president before and we were talking with their staff and, well, he's not going to do it. Believe me, if he's walking across the lobby and he sees a piece of trash on the floor, do you think that bank president's going to say, well, that's somebody else's job?
Right.
No, it's not his primary job to pick up the trash, but if he sees a piece, he's going to pick it up. That's to me a servant leader showing.
Hmm.
Um, I was with a leader of a large organization, and it was refreshing because it was just a very informal lunch. But guess who stood up and started picking up everybody's plates to take to the trash can? That leader, rather than somebody that says, "Well, don't worry about it. The cleaning crew will get that for us." No, I think that's an important part of
Mm.
stewardship because
Love that.
servant leadership is not putting yourself first, it's putting the others
Hmm.
first. And that's really the heart of steward leadership is putting what's been entrusted to you first. And so
Hmm.
what's best for it and not necessarily best for you.
Love that. And Bill, you've heard me talk about stewardship and leadership, and so you know that resonates with me. In fact, when I talk about stewardship, that's one of the things I say. Something's been entrusted to me. It belongs to somebody else. I'm responsible for it. I'm accountable to the one that entrusted it. And fundamentally, it's not about me. I am a, I'm a servant. I'm a steward. Now I get something out of it, but it's largely the sense of reward and doing the job well. Yes, there's some compensation too, but fundamentally, it's about somebody else. And that steward servant mindset, I'm glad you brought that up. Those definitely are almost saying the very same thing.
But yes. And to your point, I mean, we're entrusted with over 300 bankers every year at SWGSB. We are the stewards of them at a minimum for the 3 years that they're with us. And then when we turn them back over to the bank, hopefully they've gotten something better than what came in.
That's right. Well, I love that you think about it that way. And I tell you, the time I had last June when I was down there with you was delightful. The students are engaged. They're serious about their careers. They're serious about their contribution. And I'm really looking forward to being down there in a couple of months with another batch. So,
Well, looking forward to having you back on campus and getting to hang out a little bit with you.
great. Always good. There's lots here for all of us as steward leaders to be thinking about. Bill, thanks again for taking time for today's conversation.
Well, thanks so much for having me. This was very enjoyable. I had a blast.
Great. Me too. Thanks. Thanks for listening to Steward Leaders. If this conversation was helpful, you can find more episodes and additional resources at stewardleaderspodcast.com. Leadership is temporary. Stewardship is about forever.